Hello and welcome back to the TelecomTV Summit on the Cloud Native Telco and our panel discussion on the new skill set required for cloud native networks. The increasing use of cloud native practices by telcos is leading to the creation of new skill sets within their organizations and teams. Can existing skills be utilized as telcos retrain staff or acquire new talent? And how does an operator then retain this expertise? Well, with the help of today's guests, we are going to find out. And joining me on the program today are Oliver Cantor, who is Associate Director Global Products at Verizon, Danielle Royston, Founder and CEO Telcodr and Acting CEO of Totogi, Jean-Marius Antonica, Software Product Line Manager Edge Computing at Lenovo, and Ranny, Haiby, CTO Networking, Edge, IoT and Access for the Linux Foundation. Hello everyone, very good to see you all. Thanks so much for taking part in today's discussion. Well, let's start by looking at the skills required for building and also operating cloud native networks. We'll come to operations in a moment, but first, in broad terms, what skills are required for defining and building cloud native networks? Danielle, maybe I could start by asking you.
I'd love to kick off our panel today. And so I think obviously telco expertise is absolutely required for building these networks still. But I think what's really coming in the picture now are 2 or maybe even 3 new skills into this picture, which is software expertise, the ability to quickly develop and define new applications by assembling components of cloud products. So I think the second thing besides software will be knowledge about building with cloud native technologies. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the hyperscalers, so it's really understanding their capabilities and their components and how they can quickly help telcos build new applications. And I think the surprising third new skill that's going to come into the mix here, especially operationally, is financial acumen. I know that's a sort of a surprising thing, but when you're building with hyperscaler components where the price may change, new technologies coming into the picture, it's really easy to start to switch out different components for the other. Starting to manage your very variable costs with the public cloud is going to be a key. And so I think technologists usually have left this to the finance team and procurement maybe to worry about. You might worry about it once every 3 or 5 years, but it's really going to come into the picture when you start to use public cloud technology where the hyperscalers are introducing new components at lower prices and having to technologically evaluate the options and be able to use them in applications very quickly. It's going to be a big thing that telcos are going to need to start to develop.
Absolutely. Thank you, Danielle. Well, we'll come to Ranny in a second, but Jean-Marius, let me turn to you first. What do you think are the skills that are required for defining and building cloud-native telco networks?
Thank you very much. I think Danielle's answer is really spot on. The new skills that are required are a mix between the existing know-how that the telcos and their engineers have, but also new software and cloud native technologies. But to add these together and to make these two work more seamlessly, there's also the aspect of automation and being able to learn how automation can help with the deployment and the management of cloud native networks going forward. Because if you think about the complexity of these environments, you cannot just rely on the old ways of doing things. You have to have many of the stack or much of the stack automated. Otherwise, the people will burn out and there will be difficulty in adopting these technologies.
Great, thanks, Jean-Marius. Oliver, we'll come to you in a second, but first I promised we'd go back to Ranny. So Ranny, what about your thoughts for the skills that are required for building cloud native networks?
Yeah, so just to add to the required software skills, I would broaden that and say also software collaboration skills. When we talk about cloud native, it all revolves around the open source ecosystem, mostly Kubernetes, and all these projects. So it's not enough to have good software engineers. You have to have people who can collaborate within communities with other engineers from other companies, because that's really required when you want to adopt these technologies.
Thanks, Ranny. Oliver.
Yeah, I think if we extrapolate where the industry's going, perhaps more in, well, maybe it'll take 5, 10, 20 years, but the distribution of cloud computing techniques as they're being, well used in the CSPs at the moment, but rather monolithically in large data centers, that's now spreading to the edge or spreading to the rest of the world, you might say. So when we've achieved this, or when we're well down the line, what are we going to need? We'll need definitely the cloud computing technologies to be understood and engineered well by the telcos. We'll also need, of course, all of their sort of big, robust scaling high scale engineering skills to really distribute and make these technologies and the apps that run on them very resilient and reliable. And also working at the edge is not the same as working in a resource unlimited data center, theoretically. You now have finite resources, you have different environments, different security needs, different power needs. So you've got a lot of real world engineering that you're going to need to bring to bear at the edge and everywhere. And of course, then also as you continue on this journey, you're going to need well, we all believe we're going to need great data engineering. So the idea of a feedback loop and the idea of taking and working on the engineering of feedback loops into these networks so that they do self-heal and self-correct and predict the future and predict the weather and respond to what we believe is going to happen or what is happening. Those kind of skills are going to be needed as well.
Great. Well, thanks very much, everybody, for your comments on how the skills that are required to first of all define these networks. But let's now move on and look a little bit more detail at the skills needed to operate and continue to operate our cloud native networks. And Ranny, I'm going to come back to you. You give us some interesting comments on the first question there. But let's focus now on the operational side of cloud native.
Yeah, so I think in recent years, we as an industry have made the life of the people operating the networks a bit complicated. We require them to have skills that are almost the same as a programmer or a software developer, with editing things like Helm chart, Terraform templates, stuff like that. And that is really growing exponentially complex when you're trying to do real network services and deploy real network and operate them. I think the good news that I'm starting to see is maybe the pendulum is starting to swing in the other direction when we are starting to see things like intent-based networking, which is meant to make the life of whoever is operating and designing the network much simpler and allow them to express their needs and desired in a more human understandable fashion. And other projects like Nephew, for example, which aims to take the complexity out of building very complicated Helm charts for deploying network services and provide simpler mechanisms for doing that. So the good news is that hopefully when all these things mature very soon, the life of the operators are going to be easier and more intuitive. But at the moment, there is some level of complexity that requires quite a great deal of programming skills. But again, hopefully in the very near future, we're going to see things moving to the more simplified direction.
Yeah, well, let's hope so, Randy, because as you said, the complexity involved in operating networks has been increasing lately. Danielle, let's come across to you for your views on what we need as we continue, as we progress with operating cloud native.
Yeah, I agree with Ranny here in terms of really working to make things less complex. And the big advantage of that will be in the ability to start to switch out new innovations and new software that comes on the line that telcos can use. I think telco is famous for making things, customized, right? It needs to be built for us. We're the only ones that really understand this problem. But when you look at it, operating a network around the world is basically 80% the same, maybe even 90%. And so when you start getting to some more common components, you're actually going to see the speed inside that telco really accelerate. I think I always hear telcos always almost bragging how slow telco moves. But I think I'm starting to see some telcos move fast, right? They're adopting cloud native technologies, some of them putting their cores right on AWS. And so when incumbents and even challengers start to move a lot more quickly because they're less complex, I think it's going to really change that market landscape in the race to get the ultimate thing, which is more subscribers and keeping the subscribers. So I think, making things not really sort of keeping things complex because it gives you job security, but really I think the leaders here and the winners will be the people who understand making things simpler is actually the challenge. And if they can do that, they can move a lot more faster and actually win in the marketplace.
Thanks, Danielle. And Jean-Marius, let's get some additional comments from you.
Sure. So I'll bring the hardware perspective to the operationalize the network. Because if you think about it, when you start to build, design, and operate a network, it's like you're building an onion with different layers. And the layer at the bottom is the infrastructure that needs to be available in order to run the software that is providing services to the end users. And we're seeing that there are some CSPs that are trying to move their workloads in the cloud, but I think the majority of CSPs that are adopting cloud native networks are still doing it in their own data centers, in their own premises, and even they're leveraging their distributed infrastructure for the RAN to host their Open RAN or vRAN infrastructure. And when you think about what they need to manage from the network perspective, hardware is a big component of that management stack. And right now it's rather overlooked in the sense that we're seeing lots of talk about how to manage the software, how to manage the Kubernetes clusters and so on. But when it comes to the hardware piece, that's where you need to have additional solutions, or let's say the right middleware or the right amount of software tied to the hardware that gives the experience to the network engineer, to the network operator, as they would get from regular software. So it's almost as if you have software as a service, but you could also have hardware as a service. And this part is rarely seen. So the kind of skills or the kind of needs that the telcos have also have to go to this level. Otherwise, there's no infrastructure on which you can host your network.
Thanks, Jean-Marius. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. We still need hardware. We still run on hardware. And Oliver, you were nodding away during Jean-Marius's comments there. So let's come to you for some additional comments.
Yeah, I was just going to completely agree and say, slightly overlooked. My previous comments were that in the I use the word monolithic. I don't mean it in a negative form, but the slightly monolithic way that CSPs provide data centers at the moment is with a basic premise from a developer's point of view that there's unlimited resources, and that's great. But that is not true as you come into the edge, or the real world, as I like to call it. As you move to finite resources, where you'll have a limited capacity for an amount of hardware that you can actually use at an edge node, on a site, at a RAN, wherever you want to define your edge. Of course, getting right down to the device if you really want as well. But it's a sliding scale. But as those resources come into focus, hardware is the biggest one. we've done tests, if you like, bottom up for edge computing, as well as top down with the CSPs where we're in partnership with them. But the bottom up model, where we have small devices where you run multiple different software applications and maybe some network applications as well, the hardware really matters, and the performance and the interaction of that software on the hardware really matters. So I just wanted to back that comment up and say, that's a particular issue that you get at the edge, one of many. As you distribute any resources, if you like, into the real world, you're going to come up against, quite a few barriers and challenges.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for your comments on our first few questions. But we've talked about requirements, so let's now move on to people, vital components of telcos operations. So for a telco that is moving towards a cloud-native approach, what is the ideal skill mix? So let's first look at what they already have and the skill set that they've used for many, many years now. What existing skills can still be used in a cloud-native approach? Oliver, as our telco representative on the panel, let me start by asking you.
Yeah, what skills are needed? I remember a while ago, we, a few years back, talked about, network engineers over the long history of networking, tend to look outwards. It's all about whatever's going on in my box, how's it going to impact the others around me? Or more importantly, are they going to impact me, if I'm responsible for this box or this network? So it's very much an outward looking model. And of course, that means that their knowledge and skills around protocols, interoperability, interactions, and scaling, but stability, a lot of engineering around stability, around planning and occupation, Erlang formulas, very much about scaling, usage planning, almost in a sense, more generic engineering skills, really, about the stability of an environment and the resources that are available. These are the kind of skills, of course, interfaces and bandwidth and transmission and error rates and all of these standard, in many ways, kind of black box type engineering skills, you might want to call them. Of course, that's what they have today. Many of them we will need to retain. I mean, spreading the cloud computing techniques, the fantastic, elastic, brilliant, usable cloud computing techniques and tools and resources that are on offer into many thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of locations and billions of endpoints. Trying to do that is going to require a lot of those skills as you distribute them, and especially as not all of those techniques will, be able to be used quite so uniformly across all of those environments. So knowing the limitations, knowing where you can and can't, for example, move an application or apply a security policy or get the same resilience or redundancy that you need. Knowing that, those skills are still going to be needed to quite a large degree.
Thanks, Oliver. Jean-Marius, what about you? What existing skills do you think that telcos can still use in this new cloud-native approach?
Well, what it gets re-architected from monolithic, let's call it, to cloud-native is still going to rely on the same 3GPP protocols, and is still going to use the same network technology to communicate with each other. So key skills around troubleshooting, how to figure out why something doesn't work at that level, so within the application part, are still going to be very, very useful, especially since if you look at 5G, it's kind of like a hybrid type of network. You have the API-based core, where this is cloud native and a REST-based kind of functionality. But when you go towards the RAN or the data plane, that's where you're still using 3GPP defined protocols. And when something goes wrong, then you need to be able to figure out why and to fix it at that level. But that's not going to be enough, unfortunately, because now everything is decoupled. So you're moving away from this whole single box that does just A as opposed to doing B, C, and D. This black box mentioned earlier, and you're moving to this disaggregated part. So those skills will be relevant to troubleshoot the application side of the cloud native network, but beneath the applications, you now have new things that you need to troubleshoot. There's Kubernetes, there's the hardware level that I was mentioning earlier, and so on and so forth. So the key mindset of how to troubleshoot things, how to do root cause analysis, it's still very, very useful going forward, but it's not going to be enough.
So if we continue this theme, we've looked at what existing skills can be used. A new skill set is required. So how much retraining is possible? And are the new skills related to existing ones? And therefore, Oliver, is it viable to undertake a retraining program?
It is, yeah, definitely. And, I remember a while ago, we said, are the network engineers going to become coders, or the cloud engineers and the software, the IT, if you like, more IT-based engineers going to become network experts, and engineers, really, you might say. And to finish my analogy from before, or my comparison, the network engineers look outwards, and the cloud, or at least the software developers, look inward in the box and develop something new. And that's quite right; they need to. You can retrain both sides of the house. I don't think you can retrain. It's unlikely that in any short period of time, I mean, sort of 5 years, we'll have super engineers that can do the lot. I think that would be unrealistic. So I think you've got to look at your mix. Telco has to look at its mix and see, as we do automate as much as we can in the more commoditized and standardized areas of networking, like we mentioned earlier, we need to take those engineers and either retrain them into cloud native skills, and some of the ideas that have been mentioned earlier, some of the programming, some of the automation, some of the, just the cloud CSP technologies that they use themselves, how you use the APIs and you use even financially the models that are needed to acquire cloud computing resources. Or, of course, you churn those engineers, out of your network, and you have to get some new in. I know we're going to come on to talking about that. So, yes, you can retrain some, but I don't think you're going to retrain, all of your engineers to be all things to all people.
Yes, thanks, Oliver. We will indeed come on to new skills in a second. Ranny, going to come across to you. Retraining part of the mix then, in terms of getting the right cloud native skills?
Yeah, so I wanted to bring up an alternative to retraining. I think it's almost kind of contradicting skills and requirement that we're looking for. In cloud native, you want to move fast and break things, and in telco, you want to make everything reliable and resilient. So it may not be possible to retrain, but it may be possible to create teams that consist of cloud native experts as well as telco experts working together. I think practically that may work better than trying to, repurpose existing personnel or making people kind of change the way they think. So it may be more practical to have kind of mixed teams, and that may work better at the end of the day.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Ranny. Danielle, did you want to come in on the retraining, or they have operating a mix of teams?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, it's not so much network people becoming software experts and software people becoming network experts, but both sides understanding cloud, right? And building in the cloud is almost like a whole new way of architecting products. I always like to advocate for people to build in a public cloud, like use those tools. And some people will advocate, build off to the side and then move it to the public cloud. But I think that is a really bad way of really exposing people to this kind of technology, because just by its nature, if you're building on, sort of on premise in your old way of doing things, you're forced to use tools that are only available in that setting. And so by forcing people, but the IT side, to start building things in a public cloud, or network people really understanding the public cloud, then I think that's where you're going to start to see that retraining really happen. And, just look at the news and what's been going on. I mean, Microsoft bought both Affirmed and Metaswitch. And when you talk and read through the blogs of that team, Azure, as they start to build Azure for operators, that was less of a technology grab and more of a acquisition to hire people, right? They really wanted that telco expertise in the cloud. And you see that happening. You see executives from CSPs moving into Google Cloud or Azure or AWS. And so that is really happening. And, they're using those people to kind of, maybe through osmosis, teach the cloud people about network. And then the cloud people, obviously, teaching the network people about cloud. So I think it's really about learning about cloud and architecting in this whole new way of operating workloads, which is so different than just, it's not on-premise workload just running in someone else's cloud. It literally is a whole new way of architecting workloads. And I think experience with the cloud is going to be key.
Thanks, Danielle. Well, we've discussed existing skills, retraining, relearning. What about the acquisition of new skills and a new skilled workforce? Which skills do telcos have to buy in, either from a vendor perhaps, or systems integrator partner, or straightforward recruitment? Jean-Marius, let's hear your views first.
So I'd like to re-emphasize the focus on treating the infrastructure, treating the whole stack as code, and building automation around it, building the right kind of plugins, let's call it that allow the pieces to fit together. And in order to do that, you need to have programmer skills, you need to have cloud architecting skills, cloud scale application development capabilities, but also an automation mindset. It's automate everything and look at it not only from let's say from a deployment perspective, but also from an operational perspective. How do I make this, once I deploy it, easy to maintain and easy to operate? So having this kind of like a mindset change from I used to do this like this, treating it as a monolith and something that I cared about, to how do I ensure that if this goes away, I can recover my service and I can continue to maintain the SLA that I was providing. So it's more than a skill set change that needs to happen, and I listed those skills earlier. But it's also a mindset change that needs to be infused inside the organization, and I think that was the cloud first kind of mindset that needs to be adopted.
Thanks, Jean-Marius. Yes, and this is our 4th annual Cloud Native Telco Summit, and even from the very first one, we were talking about the change in mindset that was required, and is still required by a lot of telcos there. Oliver, did you want to come into the new skills required?
I agree with what everyone said so far. I think there are quite a lot of generic skills that, it's about scale, really. Telcos, obviously, over lots and lots of years have developed some of the skills in their DNA that are about resiliency and scaling things at a national, global level. And when it gets to that size and that kind of reliability at that scale, then those things can't go away if we want the applications to run at that scale. Of course, we do need to develop those new cloud skills that were mentioned, and think in a cloud mindset. There is a change there. We can't hold on to the monolithic way of doing engineering and development at telcos. But I do think that there are, on both sides, skills that are going to remain or need to remain if you're going to actually truly scale up a telco in a cloud native environment.
Great, thanks, Oliver. Well, we've just got time to close this discussion with one more question, and that's given the huge amount of work a telco has to do to secure skilled cloud-native teams throughout its operations, how does it then ensure that these skills are retained and that they can be developed and expanded in future years? Danielle, I'm going to come to you first on this one because you've got quite a background in this.
Yeah, I mean, I spent, I don't even know, about 10 years in HR, and several of them focused on compensation. And so I think that's what it's going to come down to. I think the pay structure is going to have to change within a telco. I mean, when you look externally of this kind of talent that they're looking to acquire, software and cloud, it's some of the hardest, most expensive talent to get in the world. And you're going against some of the best employers with really great names like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. And so I think compensation is going to be a big key in this. How well are they going to be able to pay? One of the tough things there is the equity packages of a telco versus the big three hyperscalers is radically different in terms of the expectations of the growth of that stock. And so I think it may come down to more cash. Obviously, putting in bonus and incentives around the projects that you're going to have as you break down. I love it. I love the term monolithic stacks into more cloud native stacks. You're going to want to put together reward incentives to attack the elephant that's in the room, which is when people start to realize that you're changing the playbook, you're changing the processes, you're automating everything, you're getting rid of the data centers, people are going to wonder, what does that mean for my job? And so you're going to need to keep them engaged and excited that helping the telco transform is actually good for their resume as well, not just for the telco themselves. That by getting these new skills, they can increase their pay, sometimes as much as 30%. Maybe go work for a hyperscaler with your telco talent. You can really energize and engage people. And so I would do it around breaking down data centers, refactoring workloads, moving towards that, getting new skills. Lots of different ways to do that, but I think it's going to come down to compensation because the other guys, the hyperscalers are looking for telco talent and they pay way better than you. And so you're going to have to start to think about your compensation.
Thanks, Danielle. Well, I'm sure any talk of compensation is going to bring the telcos out in a cold sweat at the moment, but it looks like it's a critical factor. Ranny, let me come across to you for comments on this final question.
Yeah, so first of all, I agree with Danielle. You have to start with compensation, but once you hire the right person and you compensate them accordingly, make sure they're challenged, make sure they're feeling that they're working on important stuff. One way to do it, of course, is to have your engineers involved in open source communities where they can work shoulder by shoulder with other engineers from other companies and feel that they're creating something new. But in general, you have to make sure and constantly make sure that your engineers are feeling that they're doing something important, that they're building something new because you're hiring the best and most talented ones. So keep them engaged and keep them motivated and keep them challenged. On the other hand, remember not to go into burnout issues and make sure the workload is not causing burnout with your developers. So it's a kind of a balancing act between making do the challenging stuff, but also not going too far and dealing with burnout issues.
Yeah, good points, Ranny, there. Oliver, let's come across to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring in, there's, of course, we mentioned cultural. There's, Gen Zs or whatever letter we're up to now, are caring perhaps less about the big tech brands that we might think that they do. Words like trust are becoming very important. Geopolitically, we're in more uncertain times. as I say, large brands matter less, and ethics probably and sort of moral issues sometimes become more to the forefront, it would seem. So things like, gender and other equality issues are very, very big. Of course, the climate debate's very, very big. And all of these very large issues, I know all big companies are tackling them, but the way you go about it and the way that you present your brand, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that people liked to work for very stable, very, very foundational engineering companies, and had that kind of job for life mentality that I know doesn't exist now. But I think that the brand that comes with that you probably get more from a telco, I think they need to double down on really and show their regulated, tax-paying, safe, reliable, trustable, and maybe climate friendly. These kind of cultural credentials, I think, play well with telcos, even if they obviously have some old baggage. So I think there's a cultural aspect as well as the compensation that of course drives us all to go to work as well.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. It's a very interesting mix at the moment. Danielle, I'm going to come up to you for some quick comments.
Yeah, I was just going to say, back to Oliver. I mean, yes, obviously all the different sort of elements are attractive to different people for different messages. But I think a big thing is telcos need to do a better job of advertising the cool work that's going on inside the telco. I mean, this is a big shift that's going on in telco. It's super exciting. I mean, I wouldn't be in any other industry. I think it's insanely awesome, but it's all about this new tech that's coming in, right? Shifting and rewriting these legacy, monolithic, kind of old and boring server, client, maybe even mainframe stuff. And so attracting new talent, people want to have an impact. They want to work on important stuff. And telco, 5G is coming out. We're shifting everything to the public cloud. Everything needs to be rewritten. I think these are really exciting jobs. And so we need to advertise them and really expose that we're working with cool new tech, not just on the network side, but also on the software side. And I think you'll be able to attract all of the new software and cloud talent that you need to go get.
We need to get hiring. Jean-Marius, final comments from you today.
Sure. So just wanted to add one thing, which is kind of non-obvious, but engineers are engineers. So once you have them in your employment and they do a good job, ensure that they have the right tools. They have access to the right tools to do their job, both from the point of view of being able to write the code, but also not send them on a field to do deployments, which might lead them to burnout and eventually churn. So give them the right tools to manage the kind of work that they need to do. And that's one aspect of how you can keep them engaged.
Well, thanks very much, everybody. I think we ought to have a dedicated panel just to this subject. Next year, we'll do it. We must leave it there for now, though. Thank you all very much for taking part in our discussion today and sharing your views. If you're watching this on day one of our Cloud Native Telco Summit, then please send us your questions and we'll answer them in our live Q&A program, which follows this panel. And do take part in our online poll. Every vote counts. For now, though, thanks for watching and goodbye.